One of the fundamental concepts in OOP is the data hiding. However, the concept is very strong in other languages compared to the Python itself. In the last video, we learned about the mangling, and we learned about the attributes and methods aren't directly accessed, but still they can be accessed if you would like to do that. So the name mangling is doing a kind of data hiding, something we might call maybe weakly private data. One of the useful reasons to do a name mangling is to avoid name collision. A name collision means that you have two names with the same letters, so one of them would affect the previous. Remember, if you have a function like len and then you created a variable len, then you lost the variable len. When we learn about inheritance soon, you will know that there is a father class and child class, and if the father class has the same name as a child class, you lose the access of the father class, something like that. So it causes name collisions. So this is one reason. In another case is you have a variable. Let's say you have a variable for the temperature of the room, and you don't want someone to put the temperature with a 0 value. So this is a big problem for you. So a better idea is to make this variable to be like almost hidden from him, and then you have more control on assigning the value of the temperature to make sure always it is going to be greater than 0, and so on. I would like to take one step back and go to other programming languages like C++ and Java to learn more about the data hiding in them. The reason behind that, most of the other programming languages, or especially like C++ and Java and C# and many actually, emphasize a lot the data hiding, but Python takes a very opposite direction. It's more educative to know about them. This is a C++ code. Stop the video for a minute and try to read it. The code here has a class, then class name. C++ has a lot of braces here. They are like the block in our case, and they also end the statements with semicolon. In explicit ways, they say if this is an integer or what. And then what's more important here to observe, there is a private colon, then something here, some methods and variables, and there is a public here colon, some names and some variables. The philosophy is this class has private data, private attributes and methods that shouldn't be accessed from outside, and there are public data that can be accessed from outside. So this is hidden from outside. If you try to create an object queue and wanted to access queue external, that's okay. Q.print, that's okay. If you try to access Q.internal or Q.getCode, you will get an error. So these programming languages emphasize a lot on the idea of private attribute and method, public attribute and method. Then the outsider can access the public, but they cannot access the private. So one question here, why data hiding? Or what's first data hiding? The data hiding is more about you have data you divide them to two halves. Some about the attributes and methods are public for the other guys, and some are the private data and method, and no one can access them except the inside the class themselves. Now the important part here is the design philosophy, the OOP design philosophy. In these programming languages, a good design is the one that keep putting as much as possible data in the private data and keep putting as less as possible of the public data in the public section. And what is the purpose of such a philosophy? Feel free to read this slide, but let me highlight the first one here. One good reason for data hiding is avoiding the data corruption. Sometimes in an intended or unintended way, the outsiders, the users of the code, might corrupt your data, and this might cause a lot of problems and break what we call the object integrity. So the reason behind data hiding in general is to prevent things. Also, data hiding helps us a lot to reduce the system complexity. Let's say you are using a class like a Google search engine API class, and all what you see in the class is there is a search method that you give it a query message and get query results, and that's all. Observe that Google is a very huge company, and there are a lot of classes and a lot of packages and a lot of coding that implement the search engine. but all what you see is just a single function. We call it an API. You just see this function that do things for you. So as a user, the system complexity is reduced a lot. In Python, when you try to use things as everything is public, things might be huge. But going back to Python, Python takes a very opposite direction to what is common in many programming languages. By default in Python, we leave things public and accessible, and we rarely try to restrict things unless there is a reason. In Python, we assume there are responsibility, that people will be responsible when they are dealing with our class. So they shouldn't try to corrupt our data, for example. There is some debate if it is really a language limitation, because the language isn't actually very combined like others, or it's more of culture. Like, why we do that? Is it because most of the scripting language typically cannot have a really private section, or what? I'm leaving this now for you just to know that there is some debate here, but not big debate. Now, going back to the mangling, as you know, and I hope you got a good sense now, mangling is trying to do some data hiding for attributes. And as we learned, the default is to leave things public, do not mangle things. And if you have some doubt if something should be public or mangled, do not mangle it, leave it public. Now, why do you want to really do some mangling? You mainly don't want people to play with something, although you know it is just weakly private data. It isn't something that's really strict. Here is the common practice among guys. If you would like something that people deal with it with a bit caution, just use a single underscore before it. Observe that this doesn't mangle the name. But when you just click dot, you don't get it directly among the basic attributes that are visible for you. But you can still easily access it. So we are now in the middle between a very public attribute or a mangled attribute. You just is giving a message to someone that, hey, be very careful with this variable. I expect you to not touch it or to not call this method. If you are going to do that, just be careful. If you really think that something would be like a disaster if it has a mistake, then in this case you can put a couple of underscores to mangle it. So these are the three cases. Don't touch it, which is most of the time. If there is some good reason, put a single underscore. Otherwise, mangle it. Far from that, which is better approach, to go with Python or to go with C++? This is a bit a controversial issue. And as a newcomer to programming, there are a lot of controversial issues in programming, and this is good and healthy to know about the good and the bad or the different sides. But as an advice, do not fall in the trap of the fightings. Some people take things for fighting, like you'll find him very I don't know the English name, maybe a racist. A lot of fighting, like Python lovers versus C++ lovers versus Java lovers. Do not do that. Try to learn and give yourself a space to learn about the different sides and the different pros and cons of every approach. In a very similar way, some people would fight for is it Windows better or Linux is better. Again, every side has some advantages and disadvantages. Learn about it better than fighting to one side. When you grow up and you start to use technologies, you will find fightings around technologies. So try to always be the guy who learn about why not, and to educate yourself about both sides. Avoid fightings. Also, expect mentality shifts. If observe that all of the programming languages share a lot between them, but eventually there are different philosophies and cultures from a language to another. If you are, for example, coming from a C++ and Java background, your mind will be highly tuned toward the language, and you typically need a mentality shift to move from this language to another language. Many guys, when they start to move to their second language, they start to fight a lot, and they start to hate the second language. It's very common between many Python programmers to not like to learn C++ and Java. The opposite isn't true. The reason is C++ and Java are really heavy and complicated, especially C++ in its core is very tough, and that's why it's very common as an educational language. if you are moving from a language to another, you should accept that there is mentality shift. And a good advice here is don't try to do things as you used to do them, because every language has its own philosophy. Try always to take a step back and ask yourself, okay, I learned to do that in C++ in this way, but maybe Python do it in a different way. So let's Google how Pythonic guys do things, and so on. And be open to different philosophies and culture. Don't fight and stick to a single one. And as I said, if you are moving later from Python to C++, expect to write like 10 times extra code. In these programming languages, you have much more control, and this comes with a disadvantage. They are very different mindsets. The constructs of a language like a C++ is seriously huge. So Python versus C++ is really a big deal. Yeah, that's all.